August 1st, 1944. 14:37 hours, 15th Army Headquarters, Pas-de-Calais. Major Klaus Reinhardt pressed his forehead against the cool glass of the observation room window, watching the distant white cliffs of Dover through his binoculars. For the 73rd consecutive day, he was counting Allied landing craft. 42 LSTs lined the harbor, 17 more than yesterday. The invasion was coming. Here, to Calais, it had to be. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. What Reinhardt could not know, what no German intelligence officer from Berlin to the Atlantic coast could possibly comprehend, was that he was staring at plywood and canvas. The landing craft were inflatable rubber. The tanks were scaffolding draped with painted fabric. The entire port bustling with activity visible from 21 miles across the English Channel was a stage set. And Major Reinhardt, along with the entire German High Command, was its most captive audience. 27 miles to the southwest, concealed beneath camouflage netting in the forests of Hampshire, Lieutenant General Omar Bradley's 1st United States Army Group was dissolving like morning fog. Not retreating, not defeated, simply ceasing to exist because it had never existed at all. The 12 divisions, the hundreds of tanks, the endless convoys of supply trucks that German reconnaissance had meticulously catalogued for 8 months were ghosts given form through radio transmissions, falsified documents, and the most audacious deception operation in military history. The German 15th Army in August 1944 represented the most powerful defensive force remaining in Western Europe. General der Infanterie Hans von Salmuth commanded 19 divisions totaling 230,000 men stretched along 210 miles of French and Belgian coastline. The 344th Infantry Division held the immediate Calais sector with 14,000 soldiers. The 17th Luftwaffe Field Division reinforced the coastal defenses with 12,000 men, while the elite 1st SS Panzer Division Leibstandar Adolf Hitler, with over 20,000 troops and 211 tanks, waited in reserve near Bruges. Von Salmuth was no fool. The 58-year-old Prussian had commanded armies on the Eastern Front, witnessing the full fury of Soviet offensives. He understood mobile warfare, combined arms tactics, and the importance of reserves. His intelligence staff, led by Oberst Friedrich Wegener, had been tracking Allied buildups since January with Germanic precision. Every aerial reconnaissance photo was analyzed. Every radio intercept was logged. Every agent report was cross-referenced. The picture they assembled was terrifyingly clear. The Allied 1st United States Army Group, commanded by General George Patton, was massing in southeastern England directly across from Pas-de-Calais. Wegener's files bulged with evidence. Reconnaissance flights on July 15th had photographed 84 Sherman tanks at Dover. Radio intercepts identified the V Corps, X Corps, and 37th Corps operating in Kent and Sussex. Agent reports confirmed Patton's presence at multiple locations. The 2nd Armored Division's distinctive radio signature had been tracked since March. The 17th Infantry Division, 25th Infantry Division, and 59th Infantry Division all appeared on German order of battle maps with precise locations. What made the intelligence unassailable was its consistency. Every source confirmed the same picture. Aerial reconnaissance showed the buildup. Radio intercepts proved unit locations. Double agents reported troop movements. Captured documents listed the same divisions. Even Allied newspapers, carefully monitored by German intelligence, mentioned units and commanders that matched German assessments. When separate intelligence streams independently verify identical conclusions, trained analysts consider the matter proven beyond doubt. Wegener had personally briefed von Salmuth on July 28th, presenting a leather-bound intelligence summary that represented 8 months of work. The 1st United States Army Group possessed minimum strength of 12 divisions, possibly 15. Patton commanded, with Bradley as his deputy. The force was positioned for a short channel crossing to Calais, the most logical invasion point. Historical analysis supported this. Calais offered the shortest route to the Ruhr, Germany's industrial heart. Napoleon had planned to invade England from Calais. The Romans had crossed there. Every military textbook agreed. The German general staff had wargamed this scenario dozens of times. Calais was where a rational commander would attack. Von Salmuth had nodded slowly, reviewing the intelligence summary's photographs and intercepts. His chief of staff, General Major Rudolf Hoffmann, had raised a single question. What about Normandy? The Allies had landed there on June 6th. Weren't they advancing? Wegener had smiled slightly, the expression of a professor addressing a clever but misguided student. Normandy was clearly a diversion, he explained. A fixing operation designed to hold German reserves while the main blow fell at Calais. The Americans had committed only 28 divisions to Normandy against 60 divisions available in England. Simple mathematics proved where the main effort must come. The evidence seemed overwhelming. Ultra-secret German listening posts along the coast intercepted hundreds of radio messages daily from 1st Army Group units. The 2nd Armored Division's radio operators had distinctive sending patterns, what signals intelligence called fists, that German monitors had learned to recognize. These same fists appeared consistently in transmissions from Kent. The 59th Infantry Division requested supplies using proper code formats that matched captured American signals manuals. The V Corps headquarters transmitted movement orders, logistics updates, and personnel reports that revealed an organization preparing for combat. What German intelligence could not detect, what seemed impossible for any military force to achieve, was that every single radio transmission from 1st Army Group was false. The 2nd Armored Division radio operators whose fists German monitors had learned to identify were actually 23 British Army signalmen who had studied American transmission patterns for 11 months. The 59th Infantry Division requesting supplies did not exist. The tanks at Dover were inflatable rubber, costing $90 each, compared to $50,000 for actual Shermans. The entire mighty 1st Army Group that German intelligence tracked with such confidence consisted of 1 signals battalion, 375 dummy vehicles, and approximately 1,000 personnel whose sole mission was deception. The operation was called Fortitude South, and it represented psychological warfare elevated to strategic art. British intelligence services had been preparing the battlefield since 1943, carefully building a fictional military force that existed only in German perception. The mastermind was Lieutenant Colonel David Strangeways of the British Army's R Force, working with American Colonel William Harris. Their canvas was German intelligence collection. Their paint was information across multiple channels. Their masterpiece would keep 19 German divisions frozen in place for 73 days after they were desperately needed elsewhere. The deception worked because it exploited fundamental weaknesses in German intelligence methodology. The Abwehr, Germany's military intelligence service, had been systematically compromised by British counterintelligence since 1940. Every German agent in Britain had been either captured or turned. The 20 Committee, named for the Roman numerals XX representing a double cross, controlled a network of double agents feeding carefully crafted misinformation to German handlers. These agents, with code names like Garbo, Brutus, and Trickster, had spent years establishing credibility by providing accurate but militarily useless information mixed with subtle falsehoods. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. Garbo, whose real name was Juan Puyol Garcia, was perhaps the most valuable asset in the entire deception. A Spaniard who had volunteered his services to British intelligence, Garbo had created a fictional network of 27 sub-agents supposedly operating throughout Britain. German intelligence paid him handsomely for reports that were actually written by British case officers in a London basement. In July 1944, Garbo reported that he had personally observed Patton inspecting troops in Dover. The report was detailed, specific, and completely fabricated. German intelligence accepted it without question because Garbo had never been wrong before. The aerial reconnaissance that seemed to provide independent verification was equally compromised. Allied air superiority meant German reconnaissance flights over England were rare, dangerous, and restricted to high altitude. Pilots flying at 18,000 feet through anti-aircraft fire could not distinguish plywood from steel, painted canvas from actual armor. The dummy landing craft at Dover looked perfect from 4 miles up. The inflatable tanks cast proper shadows. The fake oil storage facilities even had simulated pipelines. When reconnaissance pilots returned with photographs showing exactly what German intelligence expected to see, it never occurred to analysts that they were looking at theater props. The radio deception was perhaps most ingenious. American signals doctrine required extensive radio traffic for coordination. German signals intelligence had studied this pattern intensively. First Army Group's radio network replicated actual American communications perfectly because it was operated by Americans. Real units that had deployed to Normandy left behind small signals detachments that continued transmitting as though the units remained in England. These ghost transmitters moved between locations, maintaining the illusion of redeployment and training. When the fictional 59th Infantry Division requested winter clothing in July, German analysts noted this as evidence of extended deployment plans. The request was actually designed to reinforce German belief that major operations would not occur until autumn. The physical dummy equipment was provided by British film studios. Shepperton Studios, which had produced elaborate sets for movies, now created fake military installations. Carpenters and set designers who had built castles and battleships for cinema now constructed dummy aircraft from wood frames and doped fabric. These false Spitfires, costing £100 compared to £5,000 for real fighters, were scattered across airfields in southeastern England. German photo interpreters counted them diligently, adding them to strength estimates that showed Allied air superiority growing daily. The deception extended to the smallest details. Fake radio masts were erected near Dover. Dummy fuel pipelines, constructed from sewage pipes, ran from ports to inland storage areas. Inflatable rubber trucks, requiring only 2 men to move but appearing completely realistic from altitude, filled motor pools. Even laundry lines were hung at dummy barracks, with uniforms drying in the wind, visible evidence of troop presence. When German reconnaissance flights returned with photographs, the cumulative effect was a fictional military buildup that appeared entirely genuine. General George Patton's role in the deception was crucial. The Germans considered him the Allies' most dangerous commander, a view shaped by his aggressive leadership in Sicily and his fiery personality. German intelligence assumed, logically, that such a proven combat leader would command the main invasion force. Therefore, wherever Patton appeared, the main effort must be. Allied deception planners used this assumption masterfully. Patton made public appearances in southeastern England, always carefully observed by German intelligence. He inspected fictional units, delivered speeches to non-existent divisions, and maintained a headquarters with appropriate radio traffic. German intelligence tracked his movements obsessively, seeing confirmation of First Army Group's reality in his presence. What made the deception sustainable was that it was not entirely false. Some real units did operate in southeastern England, providing a foundation of truth upon which the larger fiction was built. The British 5th Armoured Division was genuinely stationed near Dover. Its radio transmissions, vehicle movements, and supply requirements were real. German intelligence correctly identified its presence. But this single genuine division was buried in reports alongside 11 fictional divisions. The real and false blended so seamlessly that German analysts could not distinguish between them. The logistics deception was equally elaborate. First Army Group supposedly required enormous supply infrastructure to support 12 divisions. British planners obliged by creating that infrastructure from illusion. Dummy supply depots appeared in aerial photographs, massive rectangular structures that were actually wooden frames covered with painted netting. Fake fuel storage tanks built from canvas stretched over scaffolding cast proper shadows and appeared full in photographs. Railroad sidings near Dover showed hundreds of freight cars, most of which were facades on wheels. German intelligence officers studying photographs calculated that First Army Group possessed supply capacity for sustained offensive operations exactly as deception planners intended. The personnel replacement system provided another layer of verification. German intelligence knew Allied armies required continuous personnel replacements. First Army Group's radio traffic included routine messages about replacement soldiers arriving, being processed through reception centers, and assigned to units. These messages followed proper American administrative formats. German signals intelligence intercepted them, logged them, and used them to estimate First Army Group's readiness. The replacements did not exist. The reception centers were empty buildings, but the radio traffic was perfect, and German intelligence had no way to verify the deception. Medical facilities offered additional confirmation. German aerial reconnaissance identified hospital complexes near First Army Group positions. These installations, with their distinctive layout and Red Cross markings, indicated forces preparing for combat operations. The hospitals were real buildings, but they were British civilian facilities temporarily marked with military symbols. German photo interpreters, seeing what they expected, concluded that First Army Group possessed appropriate medical infrastructure for major operations. After combat, the Red Crosses would be removed and the buildings would revert to civilian use, leaving no trace of the deception. By late July 1944, German intelligence had constructed a comprehensive understanding of Allied forces in Britain. 28 divisions had deployed to Normandy, where they were engaged in what German analysts called the secondary operation. 60 divisions remained in England, organized into 4 army groups. First United States Army Group under Patton positioned for Calais invasion. British Fourth Army supposedly threatening Norway. Canadian First Army preparing for Boulogne assault. The numbers made strategic sense. The Allies possessed manufacturing capacity for such forces. The deployments matched doctrine for a two-phase invasion strategy. What German analysts failed to consider was that the Allies might deliberately deceive them on such massive scale. German military culture valued truth, even harsh truth, over comfortable fiction. The concept of creating entire fictional armies seemed wasteful, even dishonorable. Resources spent on deception could have been used for actual forces. German intelligence therefore assumed Allied intelligence operated under similar constraints and cultural values. This assumption, rooted in German military tradition, became the foundation of catastrophic miscalculation. The intelligence failure was compounded by confirmation bias, the human tendency to interpret new information as confirmation of existing beliefs. Every piece of evidence German intelligence collected was filtered through the assumption that Calais must be the main target. When reconnaissance showed buildup near Dover, it confirmed Calais. When radio intercepts indicated Patton's presence, it confirmed Calais. When agent reports described fictional divisions, it confirmed Calais. Contradictory evidence was dismissed as Allied security measures or reconnaissance errors. The possibility that every intelligence stream might be compromised seemed too paranoid to consider seriously. General der Infanterie Hans von Zalmuth reviewed his forces with grim satisfaction as August began.
His 15th Army was the shield protecting Germany's northern frontier. When Patton attacked, and von Zalmuth had no doubt the attack was coming, his 19 divisions would demonstrate that German defensive skill could defeat even overwhelming Allied material superiority. The bunkers were prepared, the obstacles were in place, the reserves were positioned for rapid counterattack. Intelligence provided clear warning of Allied intentions. Everything was ready. 300 miles to the southwest, the real battle was being decided. In Normandy, German forces were collapsing under pressure they could not sustain. The 700,000 German troops facing over 1 million Allied soldiers were being ground down through attrition. Ammunition ran short. Fuel was scarce. Replacements could not match casualties. General der Panzertruppen Heinrich Eberbach, commanding Panzer Group West, sent increasingly desperate messages to Berlin requesting reinforcements, particularly the powerful divisions held in reserve near Calais. The requests were denied. Those divisions must be preserved for the main battle when Patton attacked across the straits. On August 1st, the facade began showing imperceptible cracks that German intelligence was structurally incapable of recognizing. Oberst Friedrich Wegener sat in his underground operations center beneath 15th Army Headquarters, surrounded by maps covered in unit symbols and colored pens. His staff of 32 intelligence analysts worked in shifts around the clock, processing reconnaissance reports, agent messages, and signals intercepts. The accumulated evidence pointed to one inescapable conclusion. First Army Group would strike within 2 weeks. The timing calculation was based on multiple factors. Tidal patterns favored amphibious operations between August 8th and August 15th. Weather forecasts suggested favorable conditions. Moon phases would provide adequate illumination for nighttime assembly. Most significantly, German signals intelligence had intercepted messages indicating First Army Group divisions completing final training exercises. Units requesting ammunition suggested imminent deployment. Medical units moving forward indicated preparation for casualties. Everything pointed to mid-August as the invasion window. What Wegener could not know was that every calculation was deliberately planted. The weather reports his agents provided were accurate, making them credible. The tidal information was publicly available, requiring no deception. But the signals traffic about training completion was fabricated. The ammunition requests came from units that did not exist. The medical movements were theater, ambulances driving in circles to create dust clouds visible to German observation posts across the Channel. Allied deception planners had studied German analytical methodology for months, learning exactly what evidence German intelligence would find convincing, then manufacturing that evidence with industrial precision. The physical dummy installations near Dover were maintained with obsessive attention to detail. British Army camouflage units, working under cover of darkness, regularly moved the inflatable tanks to new positions, creating the impression of units rotating through training areas. Dummy landing craft were repositioned to simulate maintenance and preparation activities. Fake supply dumps grew larger, with new stacks of crates appearing in aerial photographs. German photo interpreters, comparing images from successive reconnaissance flights, documented the buildup with satisfaction. The enemy's preparations were proceeding exactly as expected. Lieutenant Heinrich Müller, a signals intelligence specialist assigned to intercept Station Salamander near Boulogne, had been monitoring American radio traffic since March. His particular focus was the 2nd Armored Division, whose radio network he had learned to identify by distinctive characteristics. The division's radio operators had particular habits, timing patterns in their transmissions, specific phraseology in their message formats, even recognizable errors in encoding procedures. Müller had documented these patterns in a thick file that represented 6 months of meticulous observation. On the night of July 29th, Müller detected something unusual. The 2nd Armored Division's radio network had gone silent for approximately 14 hours, an unprecedented communications blackout. When transmissions resumed, the patterns were identical to before. Same operators, same procedures, same encoding errors. Müller logged the incident as a security drill, exactly as Allied deception planners had intended. What had actually occurred was a shift change, British operators replacing Americans who had rotated to different positions. But the handover was so carefully rehearsed that German signals intelligence detected no change. The agent network provided continuous reinforcement of the deception. Garbo, operating from his handler's offices in London, filed a report on August 2nd describing a conversation overheard in a Dover pub. American officers, supposedly celebrating a promotion, had discussed upcoming operations in language carefully designed to avoid direct security violations while revealing critical information. The officers mentioned being home by Christmas, suggesting an autumn offensive. They complained about the chalk cliffs making them sneeze, confirming Dover as their location. They referenced their commanding general's temper, an obvious allusion to Patton. The report was precisely what German intelligence wanted to hear, confirmation from human sources of what technical intelligence already indicated. German counterintelligence, the Abwehr Section 3, responsible for detecting enemy espionage, had been systematically dismantled by internal Nazi Party politics. Admiral Wilhelm Canaris, the former Abwehr chief, had been arrested in February 1944 for suspected involvement in resistance activities. His organization had been absorbed into the SS Reich Security main office, where ideological reliability mattered more than professional competence. The officers who might have questioned whether every German agent in Britain sending identical information might indicate compromise had been purged or transferred. The new leadership accepted agent reports at face value, seeing only confirmation of German superiority in intelligence gathering. The railway deception added another dimension to the illusion. German intelligence tracked Allied rail movements by monitoring signal traffic between stations, counting trains, and analyzing loading patterns. British railway operators working with military deception units created the appearance of massive troop movements towards southeastern England. Trains ran on precise schedules between London and Dover, their movements visible to German observers across the Channel. What German intelligence could not detect was that many trains were empty, running continuous loops to create traffic density. Others carried the same cargo repeatedly, loaded at one station, transported to Dover, unloaded, then shipped back to be loaded again, an endless cycle creating the impression of continuous supply buildup. The shipping concentration at Dover represented the most visible element of the deception. German observers on the French coast could see the harbor through telescopes on clear days. The landing craft lined the docks in neat rows. Supply ships filled the anchorage. The activity appeared frantic, constant movement suggesting imminent departure. What German observers were actually witnessing was carefully choreographed theater. The landing craft were plywood shells floating on pontoons. The supply ships were genuine vessels, but they were loading and unloading the same cargo repeatedly, creating activity without substance. Harbor tugs moved between vessels, generating wakes and smoke that suggested constant operations. General Major Rudolf Hoffmann, von Salmuth's chief of staff, raised concerns about intelligence reliability during a staff meeting on August 3rd. His question was carefully phrased to avoid suggesting that Wegener's analysis was wrong, which would have been career suicide. Instead, Hoffmann asked whether the Allies might be attempting deception, whether the obvious buildup near Dover might be too obvious. Von Salmuth considered the question seriously before responding. The evidence was too comprehensive for deception, he explained. No military force possessed resources to create such elaborate false installations while simultaneously conducting actual operations in Normandy. The logistics alone would be impossible. Therefore, the Dover buildup must be genuine. The response reflected a fundamental misunderstanding of Allied industrial capacity. German military planning was constrained by resource scarcity. Every vehicle, weapon, and soldier represented precious resources that could not be wasted. The concept of deliberately creating false armies seemed profligate beyond comprehension. How could the Allies justify building thousands of dummy tanks when those resources could produce actual weapons? The answer, which German leadership could not grasp, was that Allied industrial output was so vast that resources spent on deception represented negligible fractions of total production. The rubber and plywood used for dummy equipment cost less than 1 day's worth of actual weapons production. The Norwegian deception, Operation Fortitude North, provided additional strategic confusion. German intelligence detected preparations for a British assault on Norway, threatening to cut off German forces isolated there and open a northern front. This fictional operation, supported by fake radio traffic and double agent reports, forced Germany to maintain 12 divisions in Norway and Denmark against a threat that existed only in perception. These divisions, desperately needed in Normandy, remained frozen in place by phantom armies that never materialized. Air reconnaissance over England became increasingly dangerous for German pilots as Allied air superiority intensified. The few reconnaissance flights that managed to reach southeastern England and return faced constant fighter interception and dense anti-aircraft fire. Pilots flew at maximum altitude and speed, their cameras clicking frantically as they crossed the coast. The resulting photographs, taken from 18 to 20,000 feet through industrial haze and often under fire, showed exactly what they were meant to show. The dummy installations were designed specifically for high-altitude photography. Details that would reveal deception at ground level were invisible from 4 miles up. The 1st SS Panzer Division Leibstandarte Adolf Hitler represented the most powerful reserve force available to 15th Army. Its commander, SS Brigadeführer Theodor Wisch, had fought on the Eastern Front, in Italy, and during the Normandy invasion itself before being transferred north. Wisch understood modern armored warfare better than perhaps any officer in the 15th Army. His division possessed 211 tanks, including 71 Tiger tanks with their formidable 88mm guns. In any battle at Calais, Leibstandarte would be the hammer that shattered the Allied landing. Wish reviewed intelligence summaries with professional skepticism born from combat experience. The 1st Army Group order of battle showed 12 divisions, including 3 armored divisions. If accurate, Patton commanded approximately 170,000 men and over 700 tanks. Against prepared defenses, historical analysis suggested attackers needed 3-to-1 superiority for success. The math did not favor the Americans, unless they were even stronger than intelligence indicated. Wish requested updated aerial reconnaissance, specifically looking for forces that might have been missed. German intelligence assured him the estimates were conservative. 1st Army Group might actually be larger. The deception succeeded because it told German intelligence what it already believed. Professional military analysts trained in German doctrine assumed Allied planning followed rational principles. The shortest route to Germany's industrial heartland ran through Calais. Therefore, major forces must be positioned at Calais. Normandy, being further from Germany and offering more difficult terrain, must be secondary. When intelligence confirmed these assumptions, it seemed to validate German strategic analysis. The circularity of this reasoning, assumptions confirming evidence that confirmed assumptions, was invisible to officers trained to see patterns that fit doctrine. Major Reinhardt, still observing Dover on August 5th, noted 47 landing craft in harbor, 5 more than the previous day. He logged the increase in his daily report, noting that concentration continued. His binoculars could not detect that 3 of the new arrivals were the same craft that had been photographed earlier in the week, towed away, and then brought back. The elaborate shell game of moving dummy equipment created the impression of continuous reinforcement when actual numbers remained static. The psychological pressure on German commanders intensified as days passed without attack. Von Salmth faced an impossible dilemma. If he maintained maximum readiness indefinitely, his forces would be exhausted when the actual assault came. But reducing alert status risked being caught unprepared. He compromised by rotating units through readiness cycles, keeping 1/3 at maximum alert while others rested and trained. This rotation, visible to Allied intelligence monitoring German communications, was factored into Allied deception planning. The timing of false alerts was carefully calibrated to hit German units during their rest cycles, maximizing exhaustion. The economic cost of the deception was profound, though invisible to German observers. By holding 19 divisions at Calais, Germany immobilized approximately 230,000 soldiers, 300 tanks, 500 artillery pieces, and enormous quantities of ammunition and supplies. These forces consumed food, fuel, and other resources while producing no military value. The opportunity cost, what those forces could have accomplished if deployed to Normandy, was incalculable. Every day they waited at Calais was a day German forces in Normandy fought without adequate reserves. The breakdown in Normandy accelerated through early August. American forces achieved breakthrough at Avraches on July 31st, pouring through a narrow gap in German defenses. General der Panzertruppen Heinrich Eberbach, commanding armored forces, desperately requested reinforcements. The 1st SS Panzer Division could have sealed the breach. The 344th Infantry Division could have reinforced crumbling defensive lines. The 17th Luftwaffe Field Division could have provided desperately needed manpower. All remained at Calais, waiting for Patton's attack. Hitler himself contributed to the paralysis. His orders explicitly forbade withdrawing forces from Calais sector without his personal approval. The Führer, working from intelligence summaries that reflected the fictional 1st Army Group buildup, was convinced that Normandy was indeed a diversion. When Patton attacked at Calais, that would be the decisive battle. Any commander who weakened Calais' defenses risked losing the war. Officers who suggested redeploying forces to Normandy were accused of defeatism, or worse, possible collaboration with the resistance movement that was increasingly active behind German lines. The resistance itself played a subtle role in the deception. French railway workers sabotaged lines running toward Normandy while carefully maintaining lines toward Calais. This pattern, visible to German logistics officers, reinforced the impression that Calais was the invasion target. If the resistance was preserving railways to Calais, it must be because they expected Allied forces to use those routes after landing. The fact that resistance activities were coordinated with Allied deception planning never occurred to German analysts, who saw resistance sabotage as opportunistic rather than strategic. The agent network provided continuous updates through early August. Brutus, a Polish officer turned double agent, reported on August 7th that he had observed increased activity at 1st Army Group headquarters. Staff officers were working late into the night. Security around the headquarters had intensified. Vehicle movements suggested preparation for imminent operations. The report was entirely fabricated, written by British intelligence officers who understood exactly what details would seem credible to German handlers. Brutus had built his credibility over 2 years, providing accurate but insignificant information mixed with strategic deceptions. His handlers trusted him completely. The signals deception reached its crescendo on August 9th. German intercept stations detected a surge in radio traffic from 1st Army Group units. Messages indicated divisions moving to assembly areas. Logistics units reported forward deployment. Medical facilities activated. Artillery units conducted fire registration, the process of calculating precise targeting data. Every indicator pointed to imminent assault. Von Salm placed his entire army on maximum alert. Combat units moved to forward positions. Artillery crews slept beside their guns. Infantry manned observation posts around the clock. The attack could come any hour. It never came.
The radio traffic was entirely false, generated by British signals units who had perfected the art of mimicking American communications patterns. The divisions moving to assembly areas did not exist. The logistics reports described supplies that were never shipped. The artillery fire registration was pure invention, numbers and messages that described activities that never occurred. But the messages followed proper formats, used correct codes, and reflected realistic tactical preparations. German signals intelligence had no way to distinguish genuine transmissions from manufactured fiction. The physical evidence supported the signals intelligence. Aerial reconnaissance on August 10th showed increased activity at Dover. More vehicles were visible in motor pools. Tent cities had expanded. Supply dumps showed fresh stacks of material. German photo interpreters counted, measured, and analyzed, concluding that 1st Army Group was indeed preparing for imminent operations. The dummy installations had been carefully updated to match the false narrative. British camouflage units had added new inflatable tanks, repositioned dummy landing craft, and created fresh vehicle tracks in areas visible to reconnaissance aircraft. General Major Hofmann reviewed the intelligence summaries with growing unease. Everything pointed to attack, yet days passed without action. He raised the possibility of weather delays, which von Salm acknowledged as plausible. English Channel weather was notoriously unpredictable. Perhaps Patton was waiting for optimal conditions. The explanation satisfied immediate concerns, but did nothing to resolve the fundamental tension. How long could forces remain at maximum readiness before exhaustion became a greater threat than surprise? The answer came not from Calais, but from events 200 miles southwest. On August 15th, German forces in Normandy faced catastrophic encirclement. American armored divisions, the real ones that had landed in Normandy weeks earlier, had swept through Brittany and were now driving east toward the Seine. British and Canadian forces pressed from the north. The remaining German forces, approximately 100,000 troops, were trapped in a shrinking pocket near Falaise. The situation required immediate reinforcement or faced total annihilation. Field Marshal Günther von Kluge, commanding German forces in France, sent urgent messages to Berlin requesting permission to withdraw forces from Calais sector. The 15th Army, he argued, must redeploy immediately to prevent complete disaster in Normandy. Hitler's response was characteristic. Calais must be held. The main attack had not yet come. Weakening defenses there would invite exactly the invasion Germany had prepared to defeat. Von Kluge's protests that Normandy was the main battle were dismissed as panic. The Führer knew better than field commanders what the strategic situation required. The intelligence failure was now killing Germany's army. The 15th Army's 19 divisions, the most powerful force remaining in the West, sat idle while German forces elsewhere were being destroyed. The 1st SS Panzer Division could have counterattacked toward Falaise, possibly breaking the encirclement. The infantry divisions could have reinforced defensive lines, buying time for withdrawal. The artillery could have provided fire support that was desperately needed. All remained at Calais, watching a fictional army that would never attack. Oberst Wegener, still confident in his analysis, prepared an intelligence assessment on August 16th, explaining the apparent delay in 1st Army Group operations. Weather conditions, he noted, had been suboptimal for amphibious assault. The Americans were being cautious, waiting for perfect conditions. This was consistent with their doctrine of overwhelming preparation before commitment. The assessment was forwarded to Berlin, where it reinforced Hitler's conviction that holding Calais remained the correct strategic choice. The fact that weather had not prevented massive operations in Normandy for 2 months somehow did not undermine confidence in the Calais threat. The tragedy unfolding at Falaise could not be hidden indefinitely. Reports from the shrinking pocket described apocalyptic scenes. German forces were being hammered by artillery, bombed by aircraft, and attacked from all sides by forces they could not match. Casualties mounted into tens of thousands. Equipment was abandoned as units broke into small groups trying to escape. The carefully organized German army was dissolving into chaos. On August 20th, von Salmuth finally received permission to begin redeploying forces to Normandy. The order came 12 days too late. The 1st SS Panzer Division began movement immediately, but Allied air superiority meant movement during daylight was suicide. The division traveled at night, advancing perhaps 50 miles between dusk and dawn. They would not reach Normandy for 4 days, by which time the Falaise pocket would be crushed and German forces in full retreat toward the Seine. The 344th Infantry Division received orders to redeploy on August 21st. They loaded onto trains that would take 3 days to reach the battle area, trains moving at night, hiding under camouflage netting during day to avoid Allied fighter bombers. By the time they arrived, the front had moved 100 miles east. The 17th Luftwaffe Field Division never deployed at all. The unit was deemed too poorly trained for mobile operations and was kept in position at Calais until late September, guarding against an invasion that would never materialize. The human cost of the deception became apparent as German units finally engaged in Normandy. The soldiers were fresh, well-equipped, and well-trained. Had they reinforced defenses in early July, they might have prevented Allied breakthrough. Had they counterattacked in early August, they might have sealed gaps in German lines. Arriving in late August, they found a battle already lost, their strength dissipated in futile attempts to stop an enemy advance that had achieved irreversible momentum. Major Reinhardt made his last observation report from Calais on August 25th, noting that landing craft concentration at Dover had diminished to 31 vessels. He did not know that the dummy craft were being deflated and stored, their purpose accomplished. The fictional 1st Army Group was being disbanded, its radio transmitters going silent, its dummy equipment being collected. The Great Deception was ending not with dramatic revelation, but with quiet dissolution, as the imaginary army faded back into non-existence. The scale of the intelligence failure began emerging as German forces retreated across France. Officers comparing notes realized that the forces they had faced in Normandy represented virtually all Allied strength in France. There was no second wave waiting at Calais. The divisions they had tracked through months of intelligence reports had never existed. The realization was devastating. German intelligence had been systematically deceived on a scale that seemed impossible. Every source had been wrong simultaneously, or more accurately, every source had been deliberately compromised to tell the same false story. Oberst Wegener would spend the remaining months of the war trying to understand how such comprehensive deception had been possible. His post-action analysis, written in November 1944 as German forces dug in along the Siegfried Line, identified multiple failures. Agent networks had been compromised. Radio deception had been more sophisticated than anticipated. Physical dummy installations had been far more elaborate than seemed reasonable. Most fundamentally, German analysis had suffered from confirmation bias, seeing what it expected rather than what actually existed. The report was filed and forgotten as Germany faced more immediate crises. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.